I'm gonna go check. They may have dropped me. They may have dropped me. They may have dropped me.
Turn on the lights. Oh, no need.
So,
Next session.
yeah, first, dial this ID. This is the ID. What?
Oh, he has all this stuff.
This, dial this ID on the GoToMeeting.
Yeah.
So we had an early break, so we intend to finish early. So we're going to start immediately. So in this session, I'm just going to talk about the resources that we have for FIDO at the ITU, that those of you that are interested in testing FIDO can use at the ITU. And then George is going to go and do for you a deep dive of how you can actually incorporate FIDO into your application. They've done for you all the basics on why you have to use FIDO, how it helps you, and everything else. So I'm just going to go briefly through all the resources that we have at the ITU that you can use to actually deploy FIDO into your environment, or to learn how to deploy FIDO into your environment. So there are two major steps that you have to do in order for you to start using FIDO. Number one, you have to modify the login and registration screens of your application. I think Amy showed you this with her demo, that how they have been using FIDO. So at least George will be showing you how to start calling the APIs and how to incorporate these into your UI or your application so that you can start using FIDO for development. Then the other thing you have to do is set up a FIDO server, which can be used to do the authentication. So at the ITU, we have 4 major resources that you can use. Number one, a step-by-step guide on how to deploy the FIDO UAF on the native application. I don't remember whether we actually went through the FIDO protocols, but for this we actually have the FIDO UAF. This is the protocol that we're actually using, but there are 3 protocols. Is FIDO 2, FIDO UAF, and FIDO and U2F, yes, use the second factor. So for this demo, we'll mainly be looking at the FIDO UAF. And then we also have a FIDO compliance server. They've just talked about the certification. So we already have a FIDO compliance server that those of you that want to test FIDO can actually connect your authenticator to this server. And still, George is going to demonstrate how to do this. And then for those who are not interested in development, we have a FIDO app that you can use to go out there to demonstrate to the business that this is how FIDO works. So they have a hands-on application that they can use to test, which you can also download from the Android store. And if you need the iOS app, we can also give it to you. This app generally shows you how to log in, register, and also how to do transaction confirmation using FIDO. The idea is that if you have to sell it to a business or go back to your business and tell them we need to move forward with FIDO, you can actually use this application to demo and show them that this is how it works and this is how everything is done. And then, of course, we also have a web page. This web page has some of the resources that we will be talking about today, and it also has some of the code that George will be showing you here today. So it's pretty much that kind of web page that your go-to page. You find the application there, you find how to connect to the FIDO server, and you see some of the code that George will be showing you today here. And I won't go into the detail of this because George is going to discuss more into this, but ideally I'm just trying to show you what we have: the FIDO server, the client application. We also have that at the ITU. So you can use some of these resources. And this is the demo app, which you'll be able to download from the Android store. Or if you want the iOS version, we can also give it to you. So all these you can pull from the website that I showed you earlier, and try and go out there and try to demonstrate to your business users or your company or whatever, to encourage them to try and adopt FIDO. So at this point, I want to give it to George so he can give us the demo on how you can actually integrate this FIDO into your native application. Thank you. George.
Okay. Thank you, Arnold. Well, we at Accepto, we have a FIDO SDK and a FIDO server, a version of which is used by ITU. ITU has a FIDO server that you can use, and it has gives you the FIDO SDK. What I'm about to show you here is how to use that SDK and that server to integrate in your own app, which probably today has a username and password login system. How to easily integrate that SDK and the ITU server for you to have FIDO authentication in your own app. This is available for Android and iOS. I'm going to demonstrate the iOS version. So for starters, our SDK has three components. It has the core framework, the core component. This is the component that talks directly to the server and that implements all the FIDO protocols. So every complex operation, every encryption is done in this component. So you as a developer don't have to worry about it when you create your application. So this component communicates with FIDO UAF, FIDO 1, or FIDO 2 servers. In the case of the ITU SDK, it communicates with the ITU server, which is a FIDO UAF 1. It performs the three basic operations: register, authenticate, and deregister operations. It conforms to the FIDO protocols. It is FIDO certified by the FIDO Alliance, and it automatically saves the private keys in the device keychain in the most secure possible way, without the developer worrying about it. There's another component, which is the Authenticators framework. That's the visible part, the most visible part for the user. That's where he will authenticate, either with a PIN or with biometric authentication, which can be by fingerprint or face. Then there's another framework, which is the FIDO, we call the FIDO Manager, which basically automates everything. I mean, it can let the user decide which authenticator he wants to use. It can let the user authenticate or register. If is registered, he will authenticate. If he's not registered, he will register. So this is the framework that lets the developer basically, if he wants to, and if he doesn't need to customize anything, he can basically create FIDO authentication with a few lines of code, because this framework does everything for him. Part of the SDK that ITU provides you, there will also be a sample app with the code to demonstrate how to put this all together. So basically you have the three components of our solution, and they interact with each other. This slide is just to show you that your app doesn't need to do a lot of things, because everything works within the SDK. Your app basically needs to know the username and what authenticator you are trying to use, and the SDK will do everything for you and return, did the user log in successfully or not. Okay, so it's very easy to use for a developer. I'm gonna start with the hands-on. I am doing a live demo. You'll see my iPhone screen here. If it doesn't work, it's because my code has bugs. So, but well, Steve,
can you project your iPhone screen on
yes, I can. So that's what I'm about to do. I think I've covered everything here. Sorry? It's kind of a beta version. I'm gonna show you now. Okay. So
you gave the ITU the beta version, basically.
no, it's a great version. Okay, so basically, I've prepared this initial app that I'm gonna run for you now. That it's supposed to it is supposed to be the app that you have now. So usually you would have an app that has a username and password. So I've inserted a demo username and password. The user logs in your app. It says welcome demo. Then it has a button to make a transaction and a button to log out. Don't look at these two now. I just created them for future purposes. Okay, but basically when the user would press in your app a make transaction, the transaction would be made successfully. Why? Because the user is logged in. He logged in with the username and password, so he is eligible to make a transaction. When the user logs out, he goes back to the username and password scheme, right? So this is what you have now. Let's start putting FIDO in this app, okay? So the first thing you need to do is to copy the resources that ITU gives you and the SDK to your app. There's going to be files that you need to copy to your project, and you need to check the manual. I'm not gonna go into that, but in the manual you can see everything you need to do to install those files that ITU will provide you, and Accepto will provide you. Yeah.
I may have missed it earlier, but this is iOS, so do you also have an Android SDK available?
Yes, there's an Android SDK available too. it works more or less the same way.
It's buggy too. No, I'm
Sorry?
kidding. It has bugs too. I'm kidding.
Of course, every software has bugs. There's no bugless software, right? Except mine.
Good answer.
The first thing you need to do is to install these frameworks. I won't go into that. Basically, you have to copy files and register them. This manual, this documentation will also go with the SDK, so it's just step-by-step copying files, etc. So I have done that for you, and we're gonna jump to step 2, which is to indicate to the application what FIDO server we want to use. For that, we just go to the point where the app starts, and we just call the SDK and say that the server that we want to use is the ITU server with a simple command. We call the SDK and we say set FIDO server, and we say that we want to use the FIDO UAF server ITU. Okay, you could also in this SDK use the UAF server of Accepto. Okay, so you can use Accepto's server or ITU's server, and this is it. You just drop this command in your code, and it will set the FIDO server to the ITU server. From then on, all communication, and it will be the ITU server that is going to send challenges to your app, and your app is going to use the private key to sign those challenges. I'll jump to step 4. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And in step 4, what are we going to do? Let me run it for you. In step 4, I'm going to log in. And in step 4, what we want to do is, I don't know if you see those buttons, register for FIDO and deregister. And we want to enable the register for FIDO button if the user is not registered yet, and enable the deregister if the user is already registered, right? So this is very easy to do also. How do you do that? In the code where you indicate where you enter that screen, you'll just do this. You call the SDK and ask if the user is registered. Is user registered? And you indicate the username that you already know because the user gave you his username. And if the user is registered, you enable one button and disable another. If not, you enable one and disable another. Okay? This command is not so simple as is user registered, because this is user registered I created here, because what you really call in the SDK is user enrolled. Why? Because besides of giving it the username of the user, you also have to give it the authenticator that you want to use. In the iOS case, we have biometrics and PIN. So there's two authenticators, each one with an AAID. This is given to you by the FIDO Alliance when you register your authenticators. In the case of Accepto, we have these AAIDs for the PIN authenticator and for the biometric authenticator, and that's the values that I put over there. But basically it's the same. You just ask the SDK if the user is enrolled with one AAID or with another. Okay? And this is what I'm doing here. So in this moment, what are we doing? We're just setting the server, and we're asking the SDK if the user is registered. And that is why when you run the app, the user is not registered yet, so the register for FIDO button is available and the deregister is not available. So let's register the user. Let me just put the code here. Let's go for step 5 and register the user. What do we have to do to register the user? Again, to start the registration of a user, you have to call one command. You have to say, SDK, please open registration for the user name, and start an operation, which in this case is going to be a register operation. That's what I'm doing here. I'm calling the SDK, saying that I want to create a new view controller with this username and auto-starting an operation which is of type register. Okay? And I'm telling Xcode to present that view controller. And that's it. From this moment on, the SDK will take control when the user presses the register button and will show the register screen. What do I need to do next? I need just to tell my app what to do when the registration process completes. We do that implementing a delegate process, which is a callback that will be called when the SDK finishes its job, which will dismiss the view controller itself, and that will do something if there is success or not. In this case, what I'm doing, if there's success, I'm just presenting a simple alert with the title success. And if there's no success, I'm saying you couldn't register. Of course, in your app, you would do so much more than that. But this is for the purpose of showing what can happen. So basically, from the other side to this, I just included this. I open the SDK for register, and I close it when the operation is completed. Let's see what happens. Okay, so the user will log in, and I will press register for FIDO. Automatically, everything that you need to do for your user to register will happen. So from this moment on, the user can choose what types of authenticator he wants to use. He can choose the order that the authenticators will be shown to him, and he can start doing this registration for FIDO. I'm gonna just use biometric. I can then show you the PIN. This is going to be faster, okay? And I will submit. in the FIDO process, when you register, you have to prove that you are you. So that's why you're seeing the fingerprint identification screen. I will just identify myself. And the user is registered. So the SDK again did it all. What did I do? I put one command to call the register operation on the SDK, and I put one command to say to tell my app what to do when the SDK returns. Okay. So the user is now registered. Remember what we did? So the register for FIDO is now the button that is disabled, and the deregister is enabled because of what we did previously. So user is now registered. Let's put the deregister button working. Any questions until now? Is this going too technical?
It's supposed to be technical.
Yeah.
So remember, guys, we have this in-house to be used and experimented with. So if
Yes.
yeah, the developer will get to the SDK and they will work with it. It's designed to emulate someone working for a company and developing code for a government and they want to adopt FIDO. They can play with this server as opposed to going and purchasing stuff, or this is available. They can quickly integrate their sample app with it and go to their management and show how FIDO could be done.
So how it works, the licensing of this solution?
You will, if you want to decide to buy it you can talk to Accepto. If not, you can talk to any other vendor. This is not designed so you can call Accepto. Accepto is kind enough to show the technology. We work with Accepto for a long time and they agree to do that. So they are selling you what FIDO 2 can do for you. If you choose them as a vendor, you can talk to them. If not, you can talk to any other vendor. From ITUT perspective, we are saying we want strong authentication. It's easy. He's showing you 3 lines of cut and paste. You are in business. There is no reason for you to keep using username password. And a lot of the solutions of FIDO, like what Accepto does, Knock Knock App and Hyper and other ones, it's in the cloud. You don't even have to install any server. On average, it takes you 18 minutes to go from no FIDO to a FIDO in an application. It's not a joke. You could do it. That's what we are promoting. You know, it's time to kill the password. That's why we are here. This is the Security Clinic. We spent most of the day telling you why the password is bad for you. There is future authentication. It's good for you. It's the better authentication that, and now we're telling you it's not rocket science either. It's easy. Amy may disagree, but but this is my story and I'm sticking with it.
Of course, the thing you mentioned that it's 3 lines of code and it's done is a characteristic of our SDK.
Yes.
Other SDKs may be different implementation. Okay. So we're going to show now how to deregister. To deregister, I will go to the same action that happens when the user presses the deregister button, and I just call the SDK and say perform the deregistration for this username. Just this, easy and sorry?
In which case we can register someone?
Deregister?
Yeah, someone leaves
Yes.
the company.
Yes. By deregistering, I am decoupling the device from the user. Okay. So by registering, the device becomes coupled with the account. So the device now has a private key, and it can sign challenges from the FIDO server with the device. What we do when we deregister is just erase that private key from the device, so the device won't be able to sign again. Okay.
I don't know how many users really deregister. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
once you're in, it's very rare. It's not as frequent.
It's so much that even the FIDO2 protocol doesn't contemplate the deregister operation.
Yeah, let's be clear here how things. Deregistering, it's more on the public key as associated with the private key. Usually the FIDO vault, you're not going to you cannot go and delete a created FIDO credential, but it's secure. What will happen is the associated public key with this private key, that link is cut. Why sometimes we do register? Let's take use cases where you are a manager at the CVS store. You have a common tablet that multiple users use, and one, like one pen is being used for all, and then now you're saying this, or a fingerprint. Manager changed. So you can deregister, re-enroll the new manager. This is some of the use cases, because it's like if it's an iPad, it's single user. You don't want to add the finger because you want to delete the existing finger as associated by opening the private FIDO. So the registration is breaking the link, meaning whatever you have used to pass that enrollment, you need to re-enroll back again. So this is one use case, okay? From our experience, no one that has enrolled in NGA, which is FIDO, decided to go back to using password and they deregistered. It was a no-show, basically. They enroll, that's it, they stay enrolled.
Okay. So now it's possible to deregister. It wouldn't be such a prominent button on the interface. Of course, this is just a demo, but basically to deregister, you just tell the SDK to deregister that username, and I'm presenting an alert for success or failure while deregistering. So if we run the app now, remember, I still haven't changed the login system, so the user is still logging in with username and password. But I can now deregister from FIDO. It says success, and then I can register again if I want. Let's just do that. Okay. Now let's do the fun part. What's the fun part? When you log out and you're registered with FIDO, you shouldn't see that username and password. You should see just a button that says login with FIDO, and that will ask you for your, in this case, fingerprint. So to do that, you need to change the login screen. And basically what we have to do is use again the isUserRegistered method that we called earlier about the buttons, but this time it's gonna hide lots of things in the login screen and show some other things, so that if the user is registered, it will just show a button that says login with FIDO and hide all the others, and in the other case it will show the others and hide the login with FIDO button. So what's gonna happen when I run this? is only a button that says login with FIDO. Why? Because the application called the SDK. The SDK said this user is already registered, so I modified the interface to just show this button. Of course, this button still does not work because I didn't program it yet, right? So let's do it. Let's log in with FIDO. To log in with FIDO, you have to do exactly the same thing you had to do with the register operation. You just call a view controller, but instead of saying that we want to register, we'll say that we want to authenticate. This is in the main view controller. Let's see where it is. Okay, it's here. When the user presses login with FIDO, he's gonna be running this code here. What does it do? Exactly the same. It creates a view controller with the username that we want to use. Of course, in your case, you'll have to store that username, etc. in the device. In this case, I am putting the username here because I know what it is. And we say that we want to start the operation, and the operation will be an authenticate operation. This time we don't put a register, we put authenticate. And we present the view controller just as we did with the register operation. Of course, there's going to be a delegate method or a callback for when the operation completes. And what we do there is just close the view controller that we opened and do what we want to do if it's permitted or not. So if the SDK returned that the user is permitted to log in, then we do something. Okay. In this case, I am presenting the main screen of the application. And if not, I'm just presenting a simple alert with you couldn't authenticate. Okay? So these are a few lines of code that just call the SDK, and the SDK does all the heavy work for you, all the protocol work, all the managing authenticators work, managing preferences work, protecting the private key and the keychain of the device, etc. Okay? So when you run this, what will happen? Just a button, login with FIDO. When you press login with FIDO, you ask for a fingerprint and the user logged in. Okay? From now on, he can log out and always log in with FIDO. Of course, if he deregisters from FIDO, when he logs out, he's going to be back to username and password again. Okay? So this is the flow to log in with FIDO. As you see, a few lines of code, very simple to use for your developers. And let's do the final one, which is the transaction. So as you remember, the make transaction button would just make a transaction. This doesn't seem very solid. So we want to also integrate in the make transaction button FIDO verification before making that transaction. Okay? And what we have to do is basically the same that we did for login, but when the user presses the make transaction button. Let me just put the code for you. So we have the Action Transaction button. This is what happens when the user presses the Action Transaction. Let me just show you what was here before. Before, when the user pressed Action Transaction, it was just presenting a simple alert with success, okay? In the case of your application, it would call the server to make the transaction and everything. Now, what I did was also very simple. First, I check if the user is registered. If the user is registered, I will start the process of calling the SDK for FIDO authentication. If not, I will just perform the transaction successfully. Okay? But if the user is registered for FIDO, I'm just doing exactly the same thing that I've done for login. I'm creating a FIDO manager controller, view controller, with the username of my user, and auto-starting the operation authenticate, and present that view controller. Of course, when I present the view controller, I have to safeguard for when it comes back with the result of successful authentication or not. And that's what we're doing here. So this is the delegate method, the callback, and what we do here is close the authenticator that we just showed, and if the transaction was permitted, we'll say success. If not, we say you couldn't authenticate, so you can't perform the transaction. When we run this, remember we're not registered. Okay. I'm gonna try to find bugs now, and I'm registering for FIDO with a PIN and biometric. But first the PIN. Okay, this is what I did here. Let's submit. I'm gonna choose a PIN that no one uses. 1, 2, 3, 4.
No. 111.
It's faster, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I registered for PIN. Now I'm registering for fingerprint. Remember that in the register process I chose both authenticators. And I'm registered for FIDO with these authenticators. Remember that the second authenticator is just a fallback. If the first authenticator is successful, the user doesn't need to authenticate with the second one.
Are there lots of process, for example, face recognition, face ID also?
Sorry, can you repeat?
You can add
Face ID basically is saying you can add.
The SDK does everything automatically. If it is a Face ID device, it will ask for your face. If it's a Touch ID device, it will ask for fingerprint.
Yeah. So
there are no iOS devices with both yet.
no, you can't, because what will happen is with the iPhone, if it has Face ID, it has no Touch ID. So
Yeah.
what the SDK does, it queries the device. It finds the list of FIDO-enabled authenticators on the device, and it will display that onto you. Okay? So this is why it's flexible. So SDK does this is why he tell you their SDK is good, because it does all that dirty work that it hide it. Okay? So well, you get presented with the options that are available for that specific device.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay, so now I registered with PIN and then face. Let's try logging out, see what happens. Log in with FIDO. when I try logging in, a PIN will be asked of me. I can put the correct PIN, but I'm going to put the incorrect PIN 3 times. This one failed, so I can try the second authentication method. And I'm logged in. When
Let me make a statement. Yeah. So the order of things, you could add that on the FIDO request. So there is a policy component of the FIDO flow that tell the app what you want from the authenticator. So again, if you have a risk engine on the back end and you determined at the moment of the logon that there is a problem with this device, you may say go PIN and touch ID or Face ID. You can force that in the challenge coming from the FIDO server. So this is one extra. Like remember when Ralph was talking about the compliance and why we are flexible with not change anything, because even at the authentication, you can enforce a stronger authentication even for the same FIDO type of protocol. It's important to know that you have the ability to get 2 factors with one FIDO authenticator because you are doing 2 means now. If somebody stole your PIN, they cannot steal your Face ID, or the challenge of doing the Face ID is harder, so you can fix what you want.
Okay, so now remember that the last step we did was adding a FIDO to the Make Transaction button. So we're now registered, so when you press Make Transaction, the FIDO, the SDK will ask for your PIN. I'm going to put the correct PIN now so that you see that the other will not be needed and the transaction is successful. Okay.
So the Make Transaction, maybe like if you are on your bank account, say add payee, and you get the FIDO challenge. If you pass, yes, you will add a new payee. Or if you want to do a transfer of money, this is where you come.
Of course, if you can always choose if the user wants to make a transaction of less than $100, you don't use FIDO. There's always policies that you can make. But basically, using the SDK is this. For the developers, it is very simple because we made it very simple to use it as a developer. Basically, just calling APIs, and this is it. It's what I wanted to do.
Just simple question. Can we change the response of the SDK itself?
Sorry?
Can we change the response of the SDK itself? For example, when I'm authenticating a payment,
yeah,
I need, for example, a reference number to make the payment actually authorized in case of any dispute.
Yes, of course you can.
To make the connection between the payment and the authorization itself.
Yes, because when you call the SDK, you have that number, right?
No, to be in the response when the customer is authenticated, I will link the payment with the authentication process.
Okay. The FIDO protocol is just an authorization protocol. It doesn't have to do with the transaction that is going on. Okay, so you do the transaction if the FIDO protocol ends successfully. So you only use the number with your own server to perform the transaction itself after the FIDO server tells you it's okay, you can perform the transaction.
So I can't check a specific authorization transaction?
No, because what will happen is you're asking the FIDO client authenticate.
To authenticate.
You're not doing authorization, you do authenticate. So if authentication is valid, okay, you go with the authorization. You can assign a code for that transaction, okay, or a reference if you want, for your own internal consumption. But this is outside the FIDO protocol. The FIDO protocol, you know the
The FIDO
assertion.
protocol only says, only has one answer for you. It's that, is the user legitimate? Yes or no? And everything you do after that is based on the assumption that the user is already verified and legitimate.
Yeah, it was done on purpose because when you do security, layering is very important. If the scope of a protocol, you start mucking around with upper layer or bottom layer, we failed. So we had, we tried to do with DLT, and then I was chairing a group at the FIDO Alliance. We wanted to authenticate with FIDO to Bitcoin. And the group went and they go to the authentication flow of Bitcoin, and they wanted to hard code the FIDO. I quit that working group. There is no output. I said, why? Because now once you start mucking FIDO into a specific of a protocol, I've killed FIDO. So the way it has to work, FIDO has to go, when you do TCP or when you do HTTP is a layer by itself. And then you build application up and down. We cannot break the internet model. I mean, we built the layering architecture here. I'm not going to go and break it somewhere else. It has to be separate layering.
So FIDO server, we can install it on our company or in cloud or
It can be anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yes. We have a FIDO server. We have FIDO 1 and 2 servers in Accepto.
The way we defined it in the FIDO Alliance, the FIDO 2 server is called a universal server. So since the header between the UAF, UTF, and FIDO 2, the actual FIDO protocol header tell you which version of FIDO the client support. So if you go to a FIDO 2 server, it has to be backward compatible with your installed base. Okay, so the task of determining which level of the protocol is go on the server. So part of the issue is that if you have old FIDO implementation and you're going to a newer FIDO type implementation, or some of your legacy devices that do not support the FIDO 2, but maybe they have the APIs of some Samsung phones, they have the old UAF. Most probably you're going to ask your provider to have a universal FIDO 2 server because you want to talk to multiple type devices.
Basically, everything the server does is store public keys. That's why it's so secure, because if someone steals the server, they will only have a bunch of public keys that they won't do anything with it.
No, but you can put the server outside the firewall and you're happy.
And that's why you don't have to have the FIDO server in your premises. No need.
Anything.
FIDO 2 is the version. FIDO 2 is the version of the library and framework. Why one?
Why you're asking tough questions?
That's a big question.
UAF 1 and 1.1, initially when we started the FIDO stuff, it was focused on mobile. The web browser was not part of the game. And then we had two vendors that went on two different approaches. Knock Knock and the founding member, and they were on mobile. The YubiKey and Google were very hip on the second type factor. And then we wanted Microsoft to be part of the game. Microsoft refused to be, because they were working on Azure and the Windows Hello platform. And internally, they had some changes in the format of the FIDO attestation to work within the Windows environment. So we did not, the Windows Hello, Windows 10 is FIDO 2 enabled. So we did not want to lose Microsoft, we did not want to lose Google, and we are working on getting Apple. So the compromise was to have a FIDO 2. So the FIDO 2 is not version 2, FIDO 2 is more of a family. So this is why you have a universal.
I'm sorry, I'm pretty beginner in this domain, so this is why
Yeah. So I mean, from your end, you should really not care, because the FIDO server, the short name for it is universal. That means it talk to any FIDO. There is multiple, flavors of FIDO. You don't care. All of them
It's
have the same characteristics.
basically FIDO 1 is as secure as FIDO 2. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The security is not the question. It's the format
It's
of the FIDO
standardization.
token and the attestation. Windows you could not use UAF because the way their federation and Active Directory work and their assumptions within Azure require certain bits to be returned. And we're not going to prevent them from doing that. So we had to modify the format of the UAF. Plus, the FIDO 2 flow, as done with the Windows Hello, is at least one round trip faster. And for like Azure, they do 1 billion transactions per day. One trip, it means one extra billion hits on their server. It makes their life miserable. So we cannot not work with Microsoft. So we had to compromise. So if we're okay, we can try to finish now if you don't have any more questions. Any questions? Okay, thank you guys, and thank you. Your presentation was right on the money and excellent, and I do thank you.
Thank you.
You really made it easy, and you did the job accomplished. Thank you. Thank you all, guys.
Sorry, just to add, yeah, we have the resources, and they're on the ITU website. You should be able to find all these resources. I'll just show you the link. Quickly.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful if you could show it, what you just showed, because I could not find it.
So everything that George has demonstrated here, and some of the protocols that you want to find out about, because I know at least UAF and U2F are already standardized in the ITU as 1277 and 1278, so they are actual standards. I remember somebody asked a question about that earlier. So FIDO is already standardized by the ITU.
It's this one?
Yeah. So here. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, so you'll be able to access the resources. You'll be able to get a copy and see how the code works. You'll be able to get the app. You can download the demo app, like the one that he was showing here. You can open the page. You have access to that.
Are you saying the resources are there right now, or they'll be uploaded later on?
Actually, the resources are there right now. They've been there for a long time, so yeah. So you see the implementation overview, and then a step-by-step guide. So that's the step that George was demonstrating right now. And then you have the application. So the demo app that George was also showing here, we have it, that will show you registration, transaction confirmation, right, and deregistration. So that application is also there. So you can download it and play around with it. And then you can also look, if you are the developer, you can also look at the step-by-step guide to see how you can actually. Okay, sorry. 1 second. I'll show it.
What do you want me to do? Show what?
Slides.
Yeah. Here?
Is it clear?
I think we have a question over there.
Yes, I wanted to ask, for those of us who have had the advantage of implementing Keycloak and U2F, is it any different?
Sorry, for?
There is a Keycloak is one of vendor open source service for authentication, and it has FIDO and U2F. It has U2F, and so
U2F?
Yes.
Sorry.
Universal two-factor.
Maybe we didn't explain this earlier, but there are 3 protocols, right? There's UAF, U2F, and FIDO2, right? So for these resources, we only have resources for UAF, but there's also a protocol for U2F. So U2F is also FIDO. So FIDO has 3 protocols, U2F, UAF, and FIDO2. But for these resources that we are demonstrating, it's mainly for UAF, which is mainly used for applications.
Yeah, the question is, can he use Keycloak? you could use any FIDO-enabled open source or a vendor provided. That does not really matter. You choose what FIDO agent or source you need to use, as long as you start making plans to go towards FIDO. That's the whole purpose. The reason we put an endpoint at the ITU and with code, because it's, we could trust it, it's available, it's secure, it's not rogue server. If you are not a believer of an open source, and some companies don't do open source, we have, a certified FIDO server available. But it's not the only way to test and play with FIDO. It's your core. That's the question.
Oh, sorry.
And it's not limited for
what happened?
Internal implementation, right?
You can use the server as you want to develop product. Develop.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming. This marks the end of the session.